Folks, happy Friday and welcome to the Freedom from the Press podcast. My name's Jason Robertson. I'm here with my co-host.
Hi, everybody. Todd Peterson. Good to have you back. We're excited for the show. We're going to do a lot into student loans, a lot in the news right now, and a lot of history to cover today.
Oh, yeah. So to frame up student loans, right now you've got the media and our political narrative screaming about who should be responsible for paying these student loans. Those on the right are screaming, oh, you should pay your own loans. And those on the left are saying, no, the government should pay our loans, which the government doesn't have any money. That means really you and I. And it's an easy argument for a conservative audience. Like, you take the loan, you pay the bill. But what we want to really dive into today is how the student loan game has been gamed by our entire political class to make money for lenders, make money for colleges, funnel money to politicians, and now they're trying to shift all that debt onto you. And even those poor students with those loans, because there was predatory lending that went on with some of the student borrowers, but that money should be coming out of the lenders, the politicians, the folks that got rich off this scam, and that's kind of what we want to explore. We want to think past. They want you to think past the sale for who should pay for the student loan, but they don't want you to really dive into how did this happen and who should we really be holding accountable instead of the American people. Todd,
yeah, well said, Jason. No, I mean, at the end of the day, the theme of this podcast, we keep going back, freedom from the press. We're trying to get real news out to people. At the end of the day, the people that get hurt by these policies, again, the big government policies, are the individuals, the taxpayers, and the benefactors in this, as always, are the politicians and the large institutions that partner nice up with the government. So we're going to get into that in a little bit more detail here today.
Nice. Well, Todd, where should we start telling the story of student loans?
Well, we could make a really brief podcast, like you said, Jason. If you take out a loan, you pay the bill, and government's corrupt, and it made this whole system, out of control here. But let's do a little deep dive into the history first. Let's figure out, how did we get here? Where are we today? We'll cover that. We'll kind of get caught up to current events here with Joe Biden's latest scheme to pass costs back on to you and I, Jason, who have no more student debt anymore, but he wants to make us pay for those that do. But this goes back a lot farther than just Joe Biden's latest promises to disappear student loans. And so we go all the way back to the GI Bill. That's really when government first got involved in instituting programs to offer, quote unquote, free college to people. Now, merit-wise, veterans deserve a lot more than they get when we talk about salary, benefits, the hardships they endure, the losses they suffer. I don't think you and I disagree that veterans do deserve something. So it starts with the GI Bill, where soldiers returning from World War II were offered a program to get back into the workplace, get educated. Tangent here, we can talk about how, you have to go to college to be successful. That's a separate narrative that you and I can maybe break down a little bit. But it starts back in the 1940s, soldiers returning from World War II, the Korean conflict, and then that small subset of the population got some benefits from the U.S. government to promote college education.
And I think we both agree the average rank and file military member has been not given the due they deserve. And any programs that we do that help service members who've dedicated time to serve this country, many giving the ultimate sacrifice, no issue, I think, from myself, any Americans. We all fully support that. But here's the problem. You get in a slippery slope. You start down the path and government has no restrictive principles. So, Todd, what happened after the GI Bill?
Yeah, speaking of the slippery slope, if this graphic had any improvements, it should have been more along that line, right? So here's the GI Bill at the top, and then here comes Lyndon Johnson in the 1960s with his Great Society programs. And when he starts spending trillions of dollars on welfare, on society, included in that is the Higher Education Act. And so that's when you start to see these programs open up to a much larger part of the population than just veterans. And so that's people based on income primarily, but you and I both know you can really game the system and you can hide a lot of your assets, hide your income. And so you start to see a lot more people opening up. And again, we can talk about motivations, reasons. Is it good that people have access to college? Absolutely. But then we can start talking about what's the best way to get people maybe on the lower income side of things into college without having to get government involved. Because as we're going to see here in this slide and through our presentation today, once government gets involved, costs get out of control. The people that are supposed to benefit absolutely do not. And then people like you and I, taxpayers, we get hosed in the process. And again, the benefactors are government, politicians, large institutions.
Well, and just to dive into that too, we had a great conversation with somebody we work with, and they're from a foreign country, and they kept referring to free college, and it's important to understand nothing's free. And even when they say we want free college, that doesn't exist. The group is paying for it. So the concept of college is we as a group, as American citizens, say, hey, you know what? We would benefit from people who go and further their education to improve the economic conditions or conditions in the United States. So we all pay a fraction of that bill for them to go get schooling. They have a responsibility to make sure they're educated in something that is going to repay that, not just the loan itself, but in their increased productivity to society. Because if society and the citizens are paying for your school, then you should look to, hey, how can I make this better for them?
But that's usually not the case. Once you hand out free money to people, they don't have that innate incentive to take advantage of it, right? If it's not earned, it's not treated the same way. And so now you can start to see people take out hundreds of thousands of dollars for a gender studies major, no applicable use in the real world, DEI programs aside. But you see people take advantage of the system. If they don't have to really pay it themselves, they're going to do things with that money that they wouldn't otherwise.
Right. So where's the next step on our student loan?
Well, Jason, our friend George W. Bush, we haven't really gotten into his overseas dealings, but he also got involved into higher education. He passed a number of major bills during his presidency. Promoted several pieces of legislation that, again, opened up college to a lot more people, spent a lot more federal money on these programs, several higher education amendments, acts that built upon previous things under, again, Lyndon Johnson, Bill Clinton. Pell Grants started to come around at this time. So everything was really getting solidified. And then you start to see government really merge with some of these larger lending institutions as well at that time. So Sallie Mae, Freddie Mac, we're familiar with these in the mortgage industry. It really operates the same way in student loans. Government picks a few of these larger banking companies and they allow them to distribute billions upon billions of dollars to these student borrowers.
And it's interesting to make that delineation. So this started as a social benefit program with the military. It gets expanded under Lyndon B. Johnson. And then understand the Republicans pushed. And if you understand, Republicans are getting their kickbacks from big finance. They're getting their kickbacks from the banks. They're getting the kickbacks from that. So if you look in the George Bush era on that middle tier, you'll see that the Republicans were the ones that were layering on the student loans, making it easier for these lending institutions to give loans. And there's this perception that it was the government giving loans. No. It's private institutions. Just, I use the example, many people don't realize, you hear the name Federal Reserve, who prints the money, and you think it's the government. Federal Reserve is a privately owned bank that somebody makes profit from. So, and then on there too, do you talk about too, Todd, how they changed the laws where you can't bankrupt on student loans?
Well, that would be giving money away, Jason. So the government made it nearly impossible to default. When you're in bankruptcy, you can release a lot of your debts here. Student loan debt does not get included in that process. So you might be broke, penniless, you have no more assets to your name, but guess what? You're still on the hook for all that debt that you took out to go to college.
And that had to be Democrats that did that, right, Todd?
You would think so, but that's, again, not the case. That's going to be our Republican leadership. And Jason, just as a side here, you talk about George Bush and Republicans promoting these policies just as much as Democrats. And I don't recall messaging. So when we talk about the failures of the Republican Party, all they were doing was lining their pockets. I don't recall between 2000 and 2008 Republicans making a push to young voters saying, look what we're doing for you in terms of getting you to college, helping your loans out. Obama did a great job messaging to young people, and he promised all these programs. He got a lot of them passed through. Young people loved Obama for that. But Republicans, they did their thing. They had a chance at least to maybe court some younger voters, but they didn't. They cared about the financial interests, their lobbyists, their politician donors. And so, again, a wasted opportunity as we talk about that too.
Right. And hopefully you guys are seeing this picture. So the Democrats start a scam. It starts as a good thing. The path to hell is paved with good intentions. They expand it with good intentions. Then the Republicans get a hold of it, and the Republican establishment said, how can we do it to make people, or so you can't default on it, and these borrowers can give tons of money. And if you're a bank and the federal government's going to let me give out huge loans that nobody can default on, how many of those loans are you going to give out, Todd?
As many as I can.
Right.
And this is also a time here. So as we end the history of our student loans timeline chart, income-based repayment plans really start to get big towards the end of the Obama administration. And as a personal anecdote, and I'm happy to take some comments below here, talking about my own financial situation. So Jason, my Ben Shapiro moment, my wife is a doctor, right? So we start dating, she's in grad school, she's about to become a doctor. We're just serious enough that I'm having these conversations with her about how do you want to go about repaying your loans? She graduated with $250,000 in debt. We are still happily paying that. I was debt free, but I got to marry, till debt do us part. And so at the time, income-based payment plans were kind of a thing. Her friends were looking at that. Some of the people she went to school were looking at that. That's a really great deal in hindsight. We did not go down that path. We went for the traditional pay it back. You have so much that you pay per month based on the percentage of your loans. So in the next few years, we'll have paid off $250,000 in debt. At the same time, her friends that chose the income-based plan were paying minimal on that. And then since the pandemic began, they were paying $0 a month when all of that was paused because they never had to refinance. This was all through the federal program. My wife did refinance with private lenders, so none of that was available for pauses, forgiveness, what have you there. But this is what Joe Biden is pushing right now, too, is more income-based plans. And we'll talk about this at the end with his latest SAVE Act that he's trying to do to eliminate some student debt here. Not a lot of information on that. It seemed too good at the time to be true almost, where you're going to pay 5-10% of your income, and then that's going to be your loan payment instead of $2,000-$3,000 a month here. But that system was one more way that student borrowers would really never have to pay anything back. So how that plan would work, then you pay the minimum payment for 20 years, and then whatever is left of the principal just disappears at the end of the plan. And I was telling my now wife at the time, like, I don't see that happening. That makes too much sense. It seems too good for a borrower. The government's going to get involved somehow and make this deal not work out. But 8 years later, here we are, and it seems like a pretty good deal. But again, a scam for taxpayers because all of her friends that left with $250,000 in debt, that's going to disappear. They're going to have $100,000 in principal that just disappears in the next couple of years.
Well, and we should clarify, these privately owned financing organizations, that doesn't disappear. That loan gets paid. And who pays that loan?
Yep.
We get to pay.
You and I do.
Right. And to see your wife's story and raise you a wife's story, let me tell you my wife's story. So my student loans, I went to college in a community college way back in the early 90s, paid that off, went back as an adult, had saved money, paid for it on my own. So my wife and I get together, and as an adult, she went back to school to finish her degree, took out $10,000 in loans. Single mom, wasn't making a ton of money. And so she signed up for some of these payment deferral programs and all that sort of stuff. So we got together and we were talking about finances. You start merging things as grown ups. We've been together 10 years now. And we're like talking about her student loans. She's like, oh, I got to apply for a deferment or that kind of thing. I'm like, oh, you should just probably look and pay it off. Well, what she didn't know is when you call and say, I can't repay, I want to defer, they roll your interest and fees onto your principal. And so then the bank now, like, your principal keeps growing. So she had done this for 4 or 5 years, however many years it was, and they don't have to send you statements. So we call to get the statements, and they send out like a payment letter without your balance saying, oh, you don't have a payment due, but you got to reapply and whenever. So we called. Her $10,000 student loan had gone to $20,000 with all the deferred and all the fees getting rolled back in. So we contacted the lender. We did the same thing you did. Let's figure out you should pay your own loans. But hopefully folks see this pattern where it's beyond just, should you pay your loan? Should you not pay your loan? These financial institutions are robbing us because they had the government passed regulations to let them give out these loans. Then the government passed regulations that said you can't default on these loans. And then the government says, okay, well, we'll forgive these loans, whatever terms we want to use. But that means the government pays the loan. The bank doesn't walk away and say, okay, thanks, guys. So they've collected all that interest and all that principal. And where does that money come from? You and me.
And Jason, I'm going to drop an article in the chat right now. So this talks about several of those institutions that you were just mentioning, have that cozy relationship between government and big business here. Hundreds of millions of dollars of student debt is owned by these private companies, but of course with the full backing of the federal government. So they're not going to lose on this. Is a win-win for them, right? They're going to get to issue these loans, reap the benefits of the high interest rates that have come about. That's not going anywhere. If the students can't pay it back, the federal government will, i.e. you and I will.
Right. So
All right,
where's the next stop on our student loan journey?
Yeah. So now that we know what's happening here, I think the natural segue is in what does that mean for the cost of college? So now here is government getting involved in higher education. Economic 101, pretty straightforward. If you influx the market with a lot of free money, what's going to happen to prices, Jason?
You know what? If I were a business and I knew there was no regulations to make my costs stay down, and I had people coming in with huge amounts of loan access available, I'd make college as expensive as possible, Todd.
Well, you know what? You would have been a great college administrator because that's exactly what happened. If you look at the chart here that we popped up, you can see pegged to some inflation. You would expect prices to rise naturally thanks to the Fed. They're always going to have inflation go up, the hidden tax. But what is really shocking, and I don't think most people fully appreciate just how much the cost of college has gone up. You can look at that green bar there. We're talking 1,500% almost cost of college increase compared to just your typical inflation. And again, you can see that pegged to certain acts of the U.S. government. When does government get more involved in the student loan game? When do they make certain promises? When do they make it more available to more lenders? And so as you get more money, you get more students in the system. Colleges are only going to do one thing, and that's...
Whoop, are you there, Todd? Are you there? Oh, Todd. Well, I'm not sure if I froze or if Todd froze. Hang on one sec, folks. Don't you love live